So this is new. We don't have a podcast, right? Right? I've just... we don't. That's so cool. Are we ready? All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another Robin Hood moment. We're continuing to celebrate 35 years since the founding of Robin Hood and catching up with our in-house experts about the milestones that have defined us throughout more than 3 decades fighting poverty in New York City. I'm Crystal Cooper, Deputy Director of Communications. I am so excited for today's conversation because it will offer a peek into a very important quarter of the work that we do here at Robin Hood that many people actually might not know about at all. Here in New York City, Robin Hood is practically synonymous with grantmaking. We invest in the best evidence-based models to help New Yorkers permanently escape poverty. But what about advocacy or partnering with government? We're joined today by Chansi Powell, Director of Policy and Advocacy here at Robin Hood. And ironically enough, prior to our Robin Hood days, Chansi and I first met and had the chance to work together in city government. So it's so nice to sit down with an old friend.
That it is.
Thank you, Chansi. So the Robin Hood Policy Office has been around for just about 5 years as of this year. When did you join? And, how'd you kind of get started here?
Yeah, so I joined in March of 2021, so I guess that's putting me at about a little over 2 years. And the way that I joined, ironically on my side, I had been a grantee of Deb McCoy, who's now leading the young adult portfolio. But when I worked in City Hall with the Children's Cabinet doing child welfare and advocacy work there, we were a grantee of Deb McCoy's. And so I was first introduced to the Robin Hood orbit then, and was really just deeply impressed by the poverty fighting model that, leads this work.
Amazing. So many people enter this universe, having worked with Robin Hood at some point in their careers previously. I think it just speaks to our role as a convener. So, Chansi, I'm curious if you can help us understand, when we say policy, what does that mean in a Robin Hood context? If you can walk us through what you and your team do and why it's an essential lever in fighting poverty, that would be really awesome.
Yeah, and this is a great question because I think even outside of Robin Hood, sometimes I struggle to define what policy means. It's one of those things you're just like, oh, I know what it is in practice, but how do you tell someone what it is without complicating it? But the simplest way I could think to explain policy is to say that it's identifying what government needs to do to move the needle on XYZ priority or issue. So in our case at Robin Hood, it's poverty fighting as our North Star. We are constantly looking at the data, research. We're talking to our programmatic partners, so people like Deb McCoy and her team and young adults, to identify what are the hurdles that you're hearing from your partners? What are hurdles that data are identifying for us as hurdles for getting someone from A to Z in terms of moving from poverty to prosperity.
Right.
And so what we do is we surface what some of these blockages are. So take, for example, child poverty as one of our flagship priorities. We'll identify with some of our partners, what are some of the characteristics of families living in poverty. A lot of them may end up surfacing some information like, they have trouble accessing benefits because they have an undocumented family member in their household. And so then we on the policy side will do a little bit more research data, and then we'll come up almost with a thesis for what action government could take to move people out of poverty. And so in that specific example, we might say, if government expands the regulations for parents and families who have an undocumented member in the household, that could elevate 20% of New Yorkers out of poverty. And that's a very simplified statement, but essentially that's kind of how our model works.
Yeah, it's a very clear example, and I'm so glad that you went there, because one of the things that is interesting to me and might be interesting to listeners is, how does policy complement our core grant-making work? And why would a philanthropy choose to do policy work, in general?
Yeah, and I think, that's a really great question. And again, it's what drew me to Robin Hood, because I thought wow, this is brilliant. Having been on the other side of government for, almost 6 years in the belly of the beast, as you know, Crystal. 6 years.
Don't we know it?
6 years is like 40 years or 42 years. I always say it's like dog years.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so essential because, philanthropy and philanthropic dollars are crucial because of sometimes the unrestricted access it provides.
That government doesn't have, right?
Right. And the innovation that's allowed through philanthropic dollars is so crucial. And so, with philanthropy, you may have the programmatic teams who are making investments into like food banks or other direct service programming needs, but we're not getting at the heart of the issue. And at the core, government really is these are the institutions at the city, state, and federal level that are driving the rules, the regulations, the procedures that regulate all of our lives. And so there needs to be, government can't do it alone and philanthropy can't do it alone. Right. There needs to be a marriage of those two. And I think the other, kind of unspoken, but, maybe implicit partner in that effort too is community and having community voice. And so, when you have philanthropy and government talking to each other and community, I mean, it's really...
you can kind of like center on identifying the problem, like what role do we each play in, driving a solution. And I know for Robinhood often, we're known for making smart bets, right? Like our investments that we're very keen on making investments that prove their worth several times over in the fight against poverty, right? So like on the grant making side, we often say that every dollar we invest in early childhood education during the first few years of a child's life yields $9 in benefit, to society over the course of their lifetime. Are there examples of how this principle might apply in the poverty context? So the multiplying effect of our work. Are there any sort of policy investments that generate exponential benefits in the fight against poverty?
If you think about, for example, the Empire State Child Credit advocacy, and this is advocacy and coalition work in which our policy team and Robinhood have been engaged for a number of years. They're working to expand access to the Empire State Child Tax Credit to kids under 4 years old, which would impact so many New York kids and their families. This has been a really important campaign that, fortunately was successful this year.
That effort really is, I'm not a data walk, unfortunately, so I don't be there. I know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's deeply impactful. We've partnered with our advocacy partners to push for the state to improve the Empire State Child Tax Credit, which would expand the tax credit to children under 4. Currently, it's for children over, older than 4. And the ironic thing is it's the under 4s who need it the most. The supports the most.
We were just talking about the grant making side. Yeah, that investment in the early years is very...
0 to 3, the first 1,000 days are the most crucial in a child's life. And so through that advocacy and convening power, the benefit will go to over 1 million children across New York State. And, you can do the math. You were just talking about it, like for every dollar it yields X return. So you do the math, and that's an exponential return on our investment. And the policy team's role was to be there, the thought partner, to facilitate research that needed to be done, to use Rich's voice where needed, our CEO, to amplify the need for the governor to back certain legislation that we've been pushing. So that's probably one of the most tangible examples, because that's something a child will take with them throughout the rest of their life.
Absolutely. And I just want to say congratulations. It's a big deal that you were able to get that expansion here at the state level. And I know that there's still so much to do.
Yeah, and I have to say, just a shout out to like Jason and Loris, who were really spearheading that work on our team, like even before my time. And I think this is a perfect example that sometimes policy wins don't happen overnight, but it's, we just got to stay in the fight till the end.
For sure. I mean, I think this is a good time to just make the point of noting to our listeners that Robinhood doesn't engage in traditional lobbying. Rather, as you've, helped us understand, we apply our knowledge and our expertise to be vocal about the solutions that can make the biggest difference in the lives of New Yorkers experiencing poverty. Help us understand what a policy campaign looks like.
Yeah. So a policy campaign can vary depending on the end goal, the scope of the campaign, how established it is. And so essentially the way that we even start our investments into a campaign is, of course, our grounding principle is to look at the data and to just talk to our partners and including our program colleagues. And so once we identify that, again, sort of going to this hypothesis that if we government does X, then this will yield Y result. Well, then, and I'll take an example of Raise Up New York, which was a minimum wage a campaign to raise the minimum wage. we identified that in supporting this campaign, there could be exponential return for New York State. More folks paying into the economy, people having more money to pay for basic expenses for their families. And so what we do is we join coalition meetings, which may happen anywhere from like every week to once a month, depending on the issue. And really, we don't want to ever overinsert our presence into the space because we know that as a funder, that can be a little murky at times and silence certain voices. So depending on the situation, we may be very vocal at the table if that's what's requested, for instance, in the child poverty coalition space. Or in other spaces, a couple of years ago when we did parole reform, that was a space where people with lived experience really should and did dominate the conversation. And we, again, at Robin Hood, really try to make sure that it's the coalition's voice that's leading the effort, and we're there to support and elevate however we can.
So as we speak today, Chansi, we are just at the heels of finishing this marathon of a state budget process. It took longer, I think, than any state budget in recent history. I'm curious, at the very beginning of this process, what were Robin Hood's stated priorities when the, session kicked off? And how do you feel about where we are today now that, the deal is final?
I would say annually, a lot of our priorities tend to spill over from the prior year because we know we're not going to always have like 100% like win. Sometimes it's about laying the foundation for the next session. So I would say in the fall, we were still kind of, we had a sense of what we wanted to focus on. There's always a focus, I think, the last couple of years, at least on housing, because, as we all know, housing and housing instability is such a deep issue that correlates very, very strongly with poverty outcomes for New Yorkers. And so that's work that Chloe Sarnoff on our team leads. But so there was a state advocacy effort we knew we'd have around expanding access to the Housing Access Voucher Program, which
keeps New Yorkers housed.
Exactly.
New Yorkers.
Yeah, and expanding access to undocumented immigrants who are obviously with the migrant crisis too. So that was definitely one of our priorities. And we tend to have, the last few years too, have a standing priority around child poverty reduction. So Rich Beery, our CEO, sits on the governor's Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council, and then members of our team have been supporting this work and giving him talking points and research that would inform his conversation. So it was child poverty, housing, and then also we were starting to think about like getting into the worker justice space a bit more deeply.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, so in prior years we were looking at worker misclassification. So basically, is someone an employee or are they freelance contractor, which means that they don't get like all those protections that come with employee status. And so we kind of took that and expanded it and said, okay, well, in addition to worker misclassification, what are some other areas? And so after talking to partners, we identified, the minimum wage campaign as an important effort.
Right.
And then we were also doing work around expanding paid family leave. So it was like sort of this package of worker justice reform.
So based on so many of these examples, Chansi, and thank you for just walking us through just how many programs we can scale through government or interventions that we can scale through government. I'm curious, without policy interventions, these critical interventions that you've named, who would we fail to reach with our programs? Like, who would we be leaving behind?
Yeah, I mean, you would leave behind the people who don't have access, don't have voice, don't have time to have voice or find the access. So, and I think that's just it's that wash, rinse, repeat cycle of poverty persisting in our country. I think a lot of times people who are living on the margins know what they need to survive and thrive. But, if you're going to work, working however many jobs, trying to just keep yourself and or your family afloat, you don't have time to do the advocacy for yourself all the time. And so that's why the organizations that Robin Hood funds through like the direct programming are so important, because they're giving these community partners a lifeline to support people who have needs. And then on the policy side, like I said, we're bridging the learnings from that side, the programmatic side, and also from data and research to make sure that, again, like this is not a wash, rinse, repeat cycle, that government is actually implementing and to the point they can do it, like scaling solutions that are going to.
And so much of this comes down to like the intricate details, right? And if everyday working families don't have the time to, go join a rally or advocate, then they surely don't have the time or resources to do this research themselves or figure out what specific policy intervention, and
again, like that's the role that I'm really proud that Robinhood is able to play is to really just kind of be that bridge to say like, hey, this is what we're hearing from our partners in government. This is what we would like for, you all to do to make permanent some of these wins.
Right.
Help us help you. And I think Rich, as our leader, CEO at Robinhood, has really been sort of emphasizing that point. Like, we're partnering with government, and we're sort of entering that relationship in that vein, and not like from
an adversarial, right,
point of view. And I think
we're on the same side.
Yeah, we're on the same side. And as they say, you or at least we say in Georgia, where I'm from, and you catch more flies with honey or bees with honey or whatever. Or I guess you don't catch bees with honey, but you catch flies with honey. And I think it's true. You gotta. So far, the help us help you has it seems like it's working. And when we do need to push, we have, and probably will continue to push. But as a partner, I mean, I think it's like a healthy relationship. Sometimes you got to challenge your partner, step up and do the right thing, but you still love them.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Chansi. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I wish you and the policy team so much luck, energy, strength, tenacity. I know it takes all of those things. Coffee. We wish you nothing but the best in the years to come.
Thank you.
You just heard from Chansi Powell, Director of Policy and Advocacy here at Robinhood. To listen to this interview and others, we hope that you visit us at robinhood.org.